Executives laughed at this janitor's illiteracy, but he shocked them by fluently speaking Dutch. In the gleaming skyscraper of a prestigious multinational corporation, Frank, the janitor, wiped the corridor floor, devotion etched into every movement of his tired hands. As he cleaned, he overheard muffled laughter, sharp and dismissive, coming from the perfectly tailored suits of the executives. They mocked his illiteracy and rugged appearance. Each chuckle twisted like a knife in his gut, but he bore the burden of his silently stinging shame. The hallway, once a path of hard work and integrity, felt like a gauntlet of derision. Every day, Frank pushed through, fueled by his family's unwavering belief that worth wasn't calculated by degrees or eloquence, yet doubt gnawed at his core. The metropolitan chaos buzzed outside, but the atmosphere within the corporation was thick with impending upheaval. Restructuring loomed large, casting a shadow over his peers. Their faces betrayed anxiety, whispers of uncertainty, but Frank felt their weight like an iron chain pulling him down. Powerless, he stood at the edges of their world, wrestling with the anguish of what was to come. What if their jobs were lost? What would happen to their families? The echo of desperation in the halls wrapped around him like a suffocating blanket. In the gloom of his thoughts, the tales of his late father came flooding back, stories of resilience, one line resonating above all: hard work defines a person. Desperate for change but paralyzed by fear, Frank began to learn Dutch in secret, a language inherited from his father who had arrived in America, weary but full of hope. Each word felt foreign, slipping past his lips like water through his fingers, yet he persisted, driven by a longing to honor his heritage. Every evening, he pored over the lessons, his heart battling against the mountain of self-doubt. The mirror reflected a son, a husband, a father, but also a man shackled by the scars of his past. He practiced day after day, listening to himself speak, his voice rising above the dusty solitude of their small home. But would those words hold weight in the polished confines of the boardroom? Would they ripple through the thick walls that had so easily repelled laughter at his expense? On the day of reckoning, the air crackled with tension. Frank could feel the fear thrumming in his chest, racing against the counterpoint of hope that surged in each eerie silence that filled the room. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. He stood, emotions swirling, as the polished boardroom became a theater of doubt and anger, and they began to outline their plans. His co-workers' fates casually dismissed like crumbs falling from a lavish table. In his mind, clarity emerged even as his heart clenched. It's time, he thought, his pulse matching the rhythm of his tumultuous thoughts. But as he gathered the courage to step forward, breath held tight, doubt crashed against him in waves. What if they laughed again? What if they dismissed him as just a janitor? His mind raced in turmoil as he confronted that moment. He was not just an employee, but a voice for others like him. Positioning himself at the threshold of that room, breathing traced with a heaviness of fear, all of a sudden, he felt the words poised to erupt within him. The stakes had never felt higher. Would this act become a beacon of respect or plunge him deeper into isolation? The moment burst forth, leaving him standing in the storm of vulnerability and endless possibility. As the room simmered with harrowing anticipation, Frank realized he would either ascend to become so much more or be cast away forever. Tension hung like a heavy curtain, waiting to unfurl. The moment unfurled like a tapestry woven with threads of courage and despair. Frank stepped into the room, every gaze locking onto him like a spotlight on a stage. His heart thundered against his ribs, battling the overwhelming wave of doubt. The executives leaned back in their chairs, curiosity dancing behind their polished facades, mixed with amusement. They looked ready to dismiss him any second, just as they had in the past. He clenched his fists, the roughness of his calloused palms grounding him. He had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his head, words swirling like leaves caught in a tempest. But now, standing here, the reality of speaking weighed heavier than he ever could have imagined. "Excuse me," he began, his voice shaky but clear. "I have something to say." The air crackled as if the room itself was holding its breath. Frank could see the executives shifting, perhaps surprised by the interruption, perhaps amused. He took a breath, steadying himself against their glaring stares. "I know you've been discussing restructuring within the company." A murmur rose, a mixture of surprise and dismissive laughter rippling through the crowd. But the sound didn't overpower his resolve. "I understand that changes are necessary, but I wanted to remind you of the people behind these decisions. The ones who deliver your coffee, clean your offices, and keep this building running." Those last words came out strong, the fears of embarrassment tumbling aside as he continued. He suddenly felt the weight of his father's teachings wrap around him like a net. "Speaking your truth has power." Each sentence reinforced his purpose. The echoes of laughter from the past faded away, allowing determination to seize the forefront of his mind. "Even the janitor can contribute to this company," he declared, voice firming. "I've been learning Dutch." The room blinked as his next words poured forth, flowing in a language he had practiced in the quiet corners of his life. "Ik ben Frank. En ik wil dat jullie weten dat zelfs de simpelst mensen woord hebben. I am Frank, and I want you to know that even the simplest people have value." Instinctively, he watched the faces around him. Eyes widened with shock, but also confusion. Were they ready to see his transformation? The moment hung, fragile as glass. Would they hear him or reduce him to mere mockery once more? As silence filled the room like thick fog, he sensed the sharp turn of their perceptions. Awareness stirred, nudging each executive to recognize the depth behind their previous judgments. Frank felt the tide shifting. In a surreal moment, he began to see some of the disdain melting away, replaced with curiosity and respect. He embraced the uncertainty lingering around him. This act was bigger than his own scars. A raw vulnerability washed over him, not just an unveiling of his capabilities but a call to recognize the integral worth of everyone, regardless of their promotions or appearance. But just as hope flickered into life, an executive countered, sneering, "Do you think speaking a language will change what we're discussing here? You're still just a janitor." The dismissal felt like ice plunging into warm water, shattering the initial atmosphere into jagged pieces. Frank's heart cracked open again, but this time, he was ready for the confrontation. He had come too far to back down. "Perhaps that's the problem," Frank replied, voice steady, piercing through the echo of derision. "Maybe it's time to stop seeing people in terms of titles. We all have a story, and sometimes those stories can change outcomes." The unyielding gaze of the room was now a battlefield. What he had learned in secret transformed into a weapon against systemic ignorance. Would they let his words resonate, or would they cling to their prejudices? As tension gnawed, Frank felt possibility crackling in the air. On the precipice of a breakthrough, he realized victory could be more than just acceptance. It could mean dismantling barriers that bolstered their weak perceptions. And as doubt retreated into the shadows, the next step loomed. Would he challenge their core beliefs, turning what began as ridicule into recognition? Or would his courageous vulnerability provoke a decisive reaction, further entrenching the chasm between them? The answers waited behind the unbreakable wall, ready to tumble down with the right push. The silence shattered as Frank faced the executives' derision, the weight of their laughter hanging in the air like a low cloud. Determination surged within him, a visceral response to the injustice of their dismissals. Memories of his father's unwavering faith in his potential ignited the fire of purpose. "I'm not just a janitor," he asserted, his voice now a clarion call that sliced through the condescension. "I am a person, fiercely committed to learning and growing. I've spent countless hours honing a skill that I hope adds value not just to myself but also to this company." The executives, taken aback, exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of skepticism and dawning awareness. Frank seized the moment, recognizing the challenge lay not solely in their perceptions but more importantly, within himself. He had breached their defenses, now he needed to solidify that inroad. "What I've learned," he continued, leaning in, is that change starts with understanding. Each of us plays a role that contributes to the greater construct of this organization, regardless of our job titles. My skills may seem small to you, but they are building blocks of communication and connection. They matter. He sensed a ripple of disquiet among them. This wasn't the performance they had anticipated. Frank's heart raced with exhilaration, the thrill of transformation surging through him with each word. Empathy and respect were now themes he sought to intertwine into the framework of their corporate ignorance, but where would he navigate from here? Fear only whispered at the corners of his resolve, reminding him of past encounters that had exposed him to ridicule. He recalled each act of vulnerability, a calculated risk he had taken, each embedding a lesson about resilience. Those lessons must not remain mere echoes in the corridors of his mind, they had to manifest into a tangible force. Given the flicker of intrigue in the executive's eyes, he pressed on, learning another language isn't just about memorizing vocabulary, it's about forging connections, expanding horizons. By sharing experiences and knowledge, I can help bridge gaps that exist in our work culture. Recognizing that potential, even in someone like me, can catalyze change that ripples through our team. The atmosphere thickened, curiosity woven into the fabric of their skepticism. Frank felt he was stepping into a space where change was not only possible but palpable. Yet, a moment of hesitation loomed. Would they embrace this new perspective, or would his intent be met with the same disdain? An older executive, one with a reputation for being particularly ruthless, leaned forward, his fingers steepled. You think you can just walk in here, recite your accomplishments, and suddenly command respect? His voice dripped with contempt. We're not in the business of charity, Frank. Each word drummed the harsh beat of disillusionment. The challenge dug deep into Frank's core, igniting his resolve once more. Maybe it's time for you to acknowledge that respect isn't handed out according to the job descriptions on our business cards. It's earned through understanding and growth. He measured his words like a sparring partner, calculating and incisive. Beneath the hard exterior of the executive lay a glimmer of doubt. Frank could see it in the creases of his brow and the slight quirk of his mouth. In that brief flicker, an opportunity unfurled, a possibility for connection that could transcend their embedded prejudices. Was he ready to push harder? Could he summon the courage to dismantle the patriarchal structure they had built around titles? He weighed these thoughts, understanding that this was both an uncertain risk and an opportunity for discovery, not just for them but for himself. Gathering his strength, Frank declared, "Let us have a conversation. Allow me the chance to demonstrate my value not just through words but through collaboration. If I can voice what others cannot, perhaps we can reshape these narratives together." The room throbbed with anticipation, Frank's heartbeat sinking to the tension that enveloped them. It was now or never. The pervasive question remained, though. Could he transform their perceptions, or would the cage of their prejudice prove too strong? The stakes felt monumentally high, and as he locked eyes with the skeptics surrounding him, he realized this was just the beginning of something much greater. Outside that room, another confrontation loomed, one that could redefine everything he believed about himself. The next step awaited. What would he discover about his own resilience? The room pulsed with an electric tension, and Frank felt the weight of the executive's gazes like a palpable force. He had taken a risk, and now he needed to make it count. Each breath fueled his resolve, igniting a strand of clarity amid the chaos of uncertainty. He was at a crossroads, realizing that his moment of truth was not merely about proving himself but about reevaluating the essence of who he was. Collaboration means more than just sharing a desk, he continued, his tone steady yet passionate. It's about creating a culture where everyone feels their contributions matter, no matter their job. You've made assumptions about me, but I am here to challenge those and show you that every role has a purpose in this organization. In those terse seconds, Frank questioned his position further. How could he leverage this opportunity? He remembered the stories of leaders who had transformed organizations not merely through authority, but through inspiration and mutual respect. Each narrative had galvanized him in moments of self-doubt, and he now understood that his voice could be a catalyst for change. The older executive, still leering but visibly unsettled, posed a question that hung in the air, "And how do you plan to do that?" Frank chose his following words with precision. By demonstrating that intelligence and value aren't confined to traditional roles. With my language skills, I can create more effective channels of communication between departments that frequently struggle to connect. He considered the essence of what he was claiming. A flicker of possibility emerged. Maybe he could help bridge cultural gaps that had long strangled collaboration within the company. What languages do you speak? One executive inquired, a hint of genuine curiosity breaking through the skepticism. English, Spanish, and I can hold a conversation in Dutch, Frank answered, the pride in his voice edging out the anxiety. Learning has always been my way of challenging myself. And I believe that embracing diversity can lead to transformative outcomes. He sensed the shift astir in their rigid postures, a lessening of their collective antagonism. It was a rare moment, one crafted from the threshold of vulnerability and strength. As they retreated into contemplative silence, Frank seized the opportunity to present his vision for a new training initiative that would foster inclusivity and communication across all teams, employing language skills as a foundational component. Imagine a series of workshops where employees learn from one another about our cultures and languages, he proposed, his eyes animated. Imagine the ripple effect of mutual respect and collaboration enhancing productivity and camaraderie. The executives exchanged glances with slight nods, a subtle acknowledgement of the value in his words, but acceptance wasn't enough for Frank. He envisioned taking this way further. Each step was a question of self-assertion. Did he dare to present them with a pilot workshop? Taking a deep breath, he declared, "Let us put this idea into action. Allow me to facilitate the first session. I'd like to invite anyone here to join. Let us test out these concepts and see for ourselves." An executive with a notable reputation for ambivalence crossed his arms pensively, evaluating the radical shift Frank was proposing. And what if it fails? Then we learn, Frank replied, his voice steady through racing thoughts. And that's the first step to growing together. Failure is simply a guiding light for progress. Every nerve in his body trembled at the audacity of his words. He was placing himself in a position of both risk and opportunity, exposing himself to criticism if he fell short. At the same time, such exposure was unexpectedly liberating. In seeking growth for himself, he found he was also advocating for others. That in the depths of uncertainty, Frank felt the burgeoning strength of his own identity materialize. He wasn't just the janitor, he was an innovator poised to challenge the status quo. Would the executives embrace the initiative, or would their conventional minds snuff out this spark? As tension thickened anew, Frank's heart raced, knowing that the final remnants of his fear were overshadowed by hope. It was not the end of a battle, but the dawn of what he truly could become. He awaited their response. The next moment loomed heavy with anticipation. Would he be accepted as a true voice within this powerful establishment, or would he be reaffirmed merely as the janitor? The stakes were undeniably high, yet it was a risk worth taking. Silence enveloped the room as the executives deliberated, their faces betraying nothing. Frank's heart thundered, an echo of uncertainty that clawed at his insides. He could feel the sweat accumulating at the nape of his neck, each drop a reminder of the precarious position he had placed himself in. This was one of those defining moments in life, a chance to shift perceptions, to redefine his identity, yet the stakes were tremendous. "Your idea holds merit," the eldest executive finally spoke, his voice low and tempered by authority. "But it requires buy-in from the entire leadership team. A pilot workshop does not guarantee improvement. You'll have to compel us to invest time and resources." The words were both a lifeline and a challenge. They could either propel him forward or push him back into the shadows from which he sought to emerge. What did he have in his arsenal to persuade them? Frank felt the weight of his previous failures loom in his mind, moments when he had been dismissed as nothing more than a janitor incapable of contributing to higher-level discussions, yet, this time was different. He had pursued knowledge relentlessly. It wasn't just about fluency in languages but a deeper understanding of the cultures behind them. This was his leverage. "I understand the skepticism," Frank replied, his tone now laced with confidence rather than hesitation. "But let us test this with a tangible outcome. I propose we pilot this in a controlled setting with a focus group from various departments. We could assess cultural synergy through collaborative problem-solving activities. This is not merely a language lesson, it's about fostering a dynamic workplace. With each word, he felt a transformation within himself. He was no longer merely the janitor. He was a strategist, a fixer determined to demonstrate his vision. In the moment he felt vague self-doubt rising like dark clouds, he countered it with determination. He imagined the faces of his colleagues, the nods of their approval, he envisioned language barriers being dissolved, misunderstandings evaporating. The executives leaned in, their sharpened attention invigorating his spirit. One raised an eyebrow. And if it becomes a farce, an unproductive use of our time? Then what? You'd have to live with that failure. Frank paused, then chose his next words carefully. If failure occurs, we analyze it and adapt. But if we achieve even a mild success, we could unravel unparalleled potential within this company, bridging gaps that silo our talents. It's part of the journey, and every step teaches us something invaluable. A silence fell over the room once more, but it buzzed with unspoken tension, a mix of skepticism and curiosity. Frank could sense that some of the executives were beginning to warm to his idea, their body language shifting slightly as they considered the implications. They were contemplating collaboration in a way they had never allowed before. As the discussion moved to logistics, Frank's mind raced ahead. The prospect of leading such an initiative was daunting, yet intoxicating. Could he effectively manage a room full of seasoned professionals? Could he navigate the delicate balance of authority and relatability? The challenge awakened a fierce ambition inside him to not merely facilitate the workshop but to transform the culture of the company through this single venture. The meeting concluded with the executives signaling their tentative agreement to allow Frank to move forward with planning. While they were cautious about taking full ownership of his vision, they acknowledged the potential benefits of the initiative. As they exited the room, Frank felt a swell of possibility and hope, yet as he gathered his scattered thoughts, a nagging question persisted: would the workshop reveal his capability and promise, or expose his weaknesses? The duality of success and failure floated uncertainly before him like a pendulum. He had set a course for change, one that would either validate his identity as an innovator or reinforce the very stereotypes he sought to dismantle. In the bustling office corridors, Frank paused to catch his breath. He realized he stood at the precipice of a new chapter, one where his professional growth was inextricably linked to his resolve not just to be seen, but to be heard, to occupy a space that many believed was beyond his reach. As he commenced preparations for the ambitious workshop, he couldn't shake the sensation that this was merely the beginning. With every ounce of determination, he knew he would have to confront the ghosts of self-doubt yet again. What would the fallout be if the workshop faltered? How would it affect his standing within the company, his newly forged identity not just as a janitor, but as a leader? It was time to navigate this labyrinth of ambition and self-assertion, armed with nothing but tenacity and vision. The days dwindled into a blur as Frank dove headfirst into planning the workshop, every detail sharpening his focus and resolve. He mapped out the objectives, scoured research on cultural synergies, and fine-tuned collaborative exercises. Each hour spent working behind a desk surrounded by whiteboards covered in diagrams and notes felt like peeling away layers of his old self. But with this monumental undertaking came a cacophony of doubts, echoes of his past resurfacing to challenge his newfound confidence. What if the executives were right? What if their skepticism proved justifiable? Frank knew he had to silence those thoughts. Each time fear threatened to obstruct his vision, he manipulated it into fuel for his determination. On the third day of planning, he arranged a meeting with a small group of colleagues from diverse departments. He aimed for their feedback, to refine the workshop concept and establish a sense of ownership that would help quell potential discontent later. As he stepped into the conference room, he felt the weight of their gazes, his peers, professionals who had once seen him as a mere janitor, now scrutinizing his every move. "Thank you all for coming," Frank began, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'm excited to share a vision that could help our company, help us all, connect more effectively." He unveiled his ideas with enthusiasm, illustrating how the planned activities would foster understanding across departments. As he spoke, though, he noticed subtle gestures among his colleagues, a raised eyebrow, an exchange of skeptical glances. The perception of him as an outsider lingered, and deep down, he felt the temptation to retreat into the shadows. "Frank, while your intentions are good, how do you expect us to trust this approach?" One of them, a senior data analyst, interrupted, crossing his arms defensively. "You can't change our workplace culture with a few exercises." Frank inhaled sharply, but he wasn't going to let their disbelief derail him. "You're right," he replied, forcing himself to meet the challenging gaze. "But change begins with conversations, with openness to new ideas. This workshop isn't just for me to lead, it's for all of us to participate in and shape together." He sensed the energy in the room shifting, albeit slowly. Some faces softened, intrigued by his insistence on collaboration. "We could give it a try, but if this goes sideways, you're going to have to take responsibility for your proposal," a manager finally added, softening her stance. The rest of the meeting unfolded with a renewed sense of possibility as they brainstormed more concepts. Discussions soon turned into fervent exchanges filled with laughter and constructive critique. Frank could hardly believe it. This was more than he had hoped for. It was a glimmer of transformation taking root. However, with every moment of victory came the weight of responsibility. How could he ensure the workshop would produce results? As he got up to leave, the senior analyst's skeptical gaze lingered on him. "Just remember, Frank," he began, voice low and cautious. "Not everyone will be receptive to your ideas." With those words echoing in his head, Frank felt the familiar tug of doubt knot in his stomach once more. Was he about to stake his reputation on this workshop? The more he dared to dream of success, the deeper the potential for failure loomed. That night, Frank stayed late at the office, combing through his notes under the stark overhead lights. His mind spun with strategies, contingencies, and questions he had yet to answer. Could he really energize a company culture that had become rigid and entrenched? He glanced at the clock, realizing he was alone in the fluorescent glow of the empty office. A moment of clarity struck. He understood then that the journey towards change wasn't merely about driving initiatives but embarking on a personal quest to rewrite the narrative surrounding his role at the company. As he prepared to head home, his phone buzzed. An email notification flared on the screen, his request for feedback on the workshop had finally gained traction, with colleagues expressing tentative excitement. But before Frank could celebrate, another email followed, an invitation for a meeting with the executives to discuss the final outline of his proposal. This was at the moment to solidify or jeopardize everything he had worked towards. What would he have to overcome to convince them once and for all that he was more than a janitor? That he could lead and inspire? The realization struck him hard. This was the crossroads. With renewed determination, Frank stepped out into the night. The air was electric with possibility, and he repeated silently to himself, "I will show them." But the lingering thought remained, would they embrace his vision or reject him once more? The next meeting was a defining moment lurking close on the horizon. Frank arrived at the executive meeting room, heart pounding in his chest. The polished marble floors seemed to reflect not only the fluorescent lights above but also the weight of expectations resting on his shoulders. He had rehearsed his presentation countless times, yet standing in front of the sleek conference tables where decisions about the company's direction were forged, nerves tickled the edges of his resolve. The room filled with the executive's chatter as he set his laptop on the table. Frank forced himself to breathe deeply, reminding himself of the discussions he'd had with his peers just days before. This was his opportunity not just to present his ideas about the workshop but to transform how they thought about him. He glanced at their faces, searching for signs of skepticism. Most were buried in their tablets, but he could feel the weight of their scrutiny. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady. "I appreciate this chance to discuss the workshop proposal that aims to foster deeper connections across our departments." Silence answered his greeting, the air thick with unspoken doubts. As he walked through his slides, spotlighting each exercise designed to break down silos and create shared understanding, a few heads turned. He noticed the senior data analyst from before, arms crossed tightly, but his expression had softened just a fraction. That small change kindled something in Frank, a flicker of hope that perhaps perceptions were beginning to shift. "Now, I want to emphasize that this goes beyond simple team building," he articulated, each word an anchor against the tide of doubt in his mind. "It's about creating a culture where every voice matters." As he spoke, he observed the changes in their body language. They leaned in slightly, intrigued. Without warning, the CFO interrupted, his sharp voice slicing through Frank's momentum. "And why should we believe that you can facilitate this change, Mr. Thomas? You were once cleaning our floors." The sting of the remark shot straight to his core, but instead of retreating, Frank summoned his inner strength. "I was cleaning floors, yes. But that experience taught me an essential truth: every role within a company contributes to its success. My journey has given me unique insights into our culture, insights that can help us evolve together." A flicker of surprise flashed across the CFO's face, a sign that perhaps, just perhaps, his words had resonated. The atmosphere trembled slightly, a crack in their skepticism. As he wrapped up, Frank felt a surge of adrenaline. He faced the executives fully, daring them to embrace his message. "Let us take this workshop not as an isolated event but as a launchpad for ongoing dialogue and growth. I'm not here to dictate, I'm here to facilitate. Together, we can map out a path forward." Engagement sparked as questions flew his way, some genuine, others loaded with skepticism. The CFO's sharp questions often felt like weapons, yet as he fielded them with composure, Frank realized the underlying tension was subsiding. He had held his ground. This conversation, no matter how uncomfortable, was a testament to his transformation. Before he left the room, the COO spoke up. "You have surprised us today, Frank. We'll consider your proposal." The murmuring among the executives indicated they were interested, but interest was merely a step, not a conclusion. As he walked out of the room, Frank felt he had crossed a threshold he doubted he could ever reach, but shadows of uncertainty still loomed. Mulling over the day's events, he couldn't shake off the feeling that acceptance was still on shaky ground, as fragile as the glass conference table that had held the weight of their deliberations. That he paused outside the door, reflecting on his next steps. What would he do if the workshop did not yield the transformative results they hoped for? Each success, marginal as it may have been, bore the burden of the next judgment. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. A simple message from a colleague read, "You nailed it. But now the real work begins." Frank's heart sank momentarily. The reality of the workshop awaited him. Could he truly deliver? With a deep breath, he whispered to himself, "This is only the beginning." But what if his past still haunted his future, lurking behind every successful interaction? Could he ever fully escape the shadows of his history? The heaviness of those questions settled in as he stepped forward, determined yet uncertain of the road ahead. The drive home was a blur of intersections and streetlights, but all Frank could think about were the lingering questions hovering in his mind. They whispered doubts, reminding him that the road he had chosen was fraught with potential pitfalls. The realities of task execution still loomed over him like storm clouds, constantly threatening rain on his newfound optimism. That he pulled into his driveway and sat in silence for a moment, the engine humming softly. The familiar surroundings of his neighborhood transplanted him back to simpler times, when success felt like a far-off dream. Sighing heavily, he stepped out and looked up at the stars slowly emerging in the darkening sky. If he could conquer the skepticism of his peers, could he also confront the fear of living up to his own aspirations? Inside the house, the comforting scent of dinner wafted through the air, grounding him in the present. His family was gathered around the kitchen table, laughter punctuating their mundane conversations. He greeted them with a smile, but as he joined them, the joy felt strangely distant. His mind, still grappling with the weight of the day, was not fully present. "Everything okay, Frank?" his younger brother asked, a hint of concern coloring his voice. "Yeah, just work stuff," Frank replied, forcing levity he didn't feel. The truth was, those heavy words spun in his mind like tumbleweeds in a desolate desert. Work stuff, indeed. After dinner, spending moments with his family helped navigate through the rigors of his thoughts. His daughter, trying to show off her latest school project, momentarily pulled him from his spiral. She stood proudly, showing him pictures of her artwork. In her innocence, he saw reflections of his own journey, one where curiosity and exploration had once ignited a fire within him. "Can you help me with a presentation?" she asked eagerly, eyes sparkling with expectation. Suddenly, he was struck by the parallel between her childhood ambition and his professional aspirations. Could he focus on growth instead of the fear of failure? He decided right then that he would. As he went through the steps of her project, guiding her with encouraging words, something shifted within him. His voice conjured inspiration not just for her but also for himself, a revelation illuminating the dark corners of self-doubt. Later that night, alone in his study, Frank set to work on the workshop plan that lay before him. The presentation slides included bold ideas, interactive elements, and strategies for sustained engagement among participants, but he felt an underlying need for authenticity. He needed to infuse these concepts with the lesson his own life had imparted, that every step, no matter how small, counted. He leaned forward, typing out not just logistics, but narratives that captured the essence of his humble upbringing, the lessons learned while sweeping floors and listening to the hum of office gossip. These stories could weave a tapestry of connection for the workshop participants, promoting a culture where everyone's voice held weight. As he crafted his message, a familiar tension nudged at him. What if they scoffed at these ideas? What if they didn't resonate? But deep down, he recognized that pushing through that discomfort was essential for growth. He challenged himself to confront that fear head-on, realizing it was derived from their judgments rather than his truth. At the end of the night, he leaned back in his chair, fatigued but satisfied. It was the first time he had confronted the task with an aliveness reflecting who he had become rather than who he had been perceived to be, and it felt liberating. With his mind racing and his heart pounding, Frank prepared to sleep, his inner dialogue busy discussing tomorrow's possibilities. The challenges ahead would be formidable, but the opportunity to guide others through a transformative experience was exhilarating. Yet those shadows of doubt still lingered. They flickered in and out of focus, reminding him that every step forward required the courage to face his past. As he closed his eyes, he thought about the following day's workshop. Would he have the strength to be vulnerable in front of those who once doubted him? Just as he drifted off to sleep, a final question echoed through the corners of his mind. Would rising from humble beginnings be enough to create a legacy he could be proud of, or had he merely stepped into an illusion of leadership? The morning sun streamed through the window, piercing the veil of sleep. Frank jolted awake, feeling the fresh energy of a new day surge through him, buoyed slightly by the promise of the workshop ahead. He shook off remnants of doubt that clung to him, pushing thoughts of failure to the recesses of his mind. A strategy began to form. He would reclaim his narrative. After a brisk shower, he stood sterile in front of the mirror. The man staring back was not merely a janitor but a vessel of potential and untold stories. As he pulled on his shirt and straightened his tie, a singular question echoed: would he step into his role as a leader? Deciding to regard the presentation as an opportunity rather than an obligation, he felt a jolt of determination coursing through him. The drive to work was different today, each stoplight causing him to ponder not the past failures that haunted him but the strength he had drawn from them. Could he transform their ridicule into a source of inspiration? He rehearsed his opening lines in his head, turning skepticism into a catalyst for authentic dialogue. Upon arrival, tension coiled in his stomach like a spring. Every piece of the plan he meticulously crafted the night before began to feel insurmountable. He strolled through the office, nodding at familiar faces, but resisted the urge to engage too much. He was focused, determined to protect the integrity of his thoughts. As colleagues gathered in the large training room, the ambience buzzed with a mixture of expectation and skepticism. He noted the smirks traded among some of the executives, a few eyes darting sideways as if questioning his capability to command respect. But within him surged a quiet resolve. This was it. The moment he practiced in private needed to manifest in public that he took a deep breath and began his introduction. It was essential to set the tone early. "Good morning, everyone," he said, his voice steady but warm. "Today, I want to share not just strategies or workflows, but experiences, moments that shaped my perspective on work and leadership." As he spoke, he felt an incredible shift within. The stories of his childhood, the relentless whispers of doubt, and the laughter of self-doubt began to weave seamlessly into his presentation. With every anecdote, he brought forth a vital truth. Vulnerability and authenticity began to dismantle the pillars of judgment standing against him. Frank could feel the room warming. Faces once clouded with skepticism now bore expressions of curiosity. The eyes that had once narrowed in disbelief began to widen in recognition. A palpable shift had occurred. The more he opened up, the more he saw them nodding in solidarity, as if they began to see threads of their own experiences sewn into his tapestry. But as the discussions grew deeper, an unsettling wave of realization crashed over him. There would be a point soon where he would face direct questions, where the fragility of his past would be laid bare. Could he maintain this equilibrium? The thought both thrilled and terrified him. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. Suddenly, one of the executives leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "You've shared some personal insights, Frank," he said. "But how do you reconcile your past with the expectations we have of leadership now?" The room held its breath, the weight of anticipation palpable. This was the confrontation Frank had prepared for, yet nothing could have truly braced him for this pivotal moment. The question cut to the heart of everything he grappled with, timeless in its simplicity but heavy with implications. Would he cower beneath the weight of expectation, or rise to define his own legacy? He steadied himself, heart pounding, intent on delivering an answer that was raw, real, and unapologetically his. "This is not just about my past, it's about all of us navigating the shadows we carry," he replied, voice steady but impassioned. A vulnerability infused his words, resonating deeply as he confronted both his past and the expectations of his audience. Yet, uncertainty still nagged at him. Was this boldness merely a momentary breakthrough, or could it denote the start of a new trajectory? And so, the dialogue continued, swirling with themes of potential and struggle, search for authenticity, and the delicate dance between past experiences and present expectations. Frank felt an electrifying pull as he engaged, realizing he stood on the threshold of redefining not just perceptions but himself. As the workshop wore on, he could sense the tide of skepticism beginning to ebb. Yet a question lingered: if he could redefine his legacy here, what awaited him on the other side of these revelations? What truths lay buried within, and would he have the courage to unearth them, even amid new challenges waiting to rise? The moment had come to face deeper layers of his identity. Could he emerge transformed, or would doubt ultimately reclaim him? As the workshop progressed, Frank felt a palpable shift in the room. The initial skepticism transformed into a burgeoning curiosity, as the executives began to resonate with the vulnerability and strength embedded in his storytelling. He could see their defenses crumble, little by little, under the weight of authenticity. "Understanding is the foundation of progress," Frank proclaimed, leaning against the table as if to gather strength from its solid surface. "By embracing our stories, we dismantle barriers that divide us. Each of you carries experiences that add layers to our collective narrative. Today, we are not merely colleagues, we become storytellers, changemakers, and allies." He launched into interactive exercises, encouraging honest dialogues between departments. Conversations about miscommunication and frustrations flowed like warm coffee, smooth and invigorating. The executives, no longer just observers, actively engaged, exchanging perspectives. Frank watched as the once distant figures transformed into allies, animated by shared experiences. One executive, the CFO, finally stood up. "I have to say, after hearing your story and the stories of my colleagues today, I realize I've underestimated not just your capabilities, but the very foundation of our teamwork. I, too, have faced doubts thinking they were a sign of weakness rather than a call to grow." Frank felt a rush of acknowledgement swell in the room. Here was validation of his journey that transcended his own self-expectations. "Everything we do is a part of our evolution," he replied, his voice steady with conviction. Together, we can redefine the narratives we create here. As the workshop drew to a close, the energy shifted from vulnerability to determination. Participants expressed their eagerness to incorporate these ideas into their daily interactions, advocating not just for themselves but for others often overlooked. Ideas bubbled to the surface: initiatives to celebrate diversity, cultural exchange programs to foster empathy, and collaborative projects were discussed with renewed passion. The executives didn't just accept Frank's vision, they committed to it. The very notion that a janitor could foster profound change in a corporate environment was becoming a powerful narrative, shifting perceptions of capability within their walls. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting a golden glow through the glass-strewn boardroom. As Frank wrapped up, he realized this day marked a definitive pivot in his professional trajectory. No longer did he merely fulfill the role assigned to him, he took ownership of his identity within the corporate fabric. As he stepped down from the podium, an unexpected applause erupted from the group, genuine, hearty acknowledgement of his journey and contributions. He stood there, a smile breaking free across his face, feeling worthy and accomplished. Weeks later, changes began to ripple through the organization. The executives moved forward with Frank's initiatives, implementing regular training sessions that not only fostered cultural understanding but also promoted mutual respect. Frank found himself in meetings not as a shadow in the background but as a respected participant, directly contributing to strategic discussions. His initial transformation fortified his sense of purpose. Beyond mere acceptance, he had solidified his role as an agent of change, a bridge between differing worlds, motivating others to step away from their own shadows, just as he had. Confidence mounted within him, growing roots as he scribed his name on the corporate map, no longer just Frank the janitor but now Frank the innovator. In the coming months, he received formal recognition from the executive team during a corporate conference, celebrated for his contributions and charged with leading further initiatives promoting inclusivity. The applause echoed loudly, confirming every doubt and insecurity had been overcome. He stood there, heart swelling with pride. This was the culmination of his journey, a testament to resilience and belief. He transformed not just his own narrative but facilitated broader change, creating a legacy defined by purpose. Frank felt grounded, at peace within the contours of his identity. No longer confined by boundaries, he had embraced the essence of his journey. He was a janitor, yes, but he was also a leader. This realization birthed authentic fulfillment. He understood now that real success wouldn't be an end destination but a dynamic journey of self-creation and continuous growth. His story resonated well beyond the walls of the corporation. Frank had not only proven people wrong, he became a catalyst for change, an inspiration to those who felt relegated to the periphery, embodying the belief that everyone holds potential. The sun set as he exited the building, a testament to the new dawn that awaited. He ventured forward into a world where every story had worth, acknowledging clearly that none of it would have been possible without embracing his own. Frank had emerged victorious not just in the workplace but in the very understanding of himself. This was only the beginning. Don't wait even one more second. You need to subscribe now so you don't miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm, and comment your reactions and theories about this ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Show your support for personal overcoming stories and make a difference.